What if I told you that one of the most powerful figures in the music industry just watched his carefully built empire begin to unravel right in front of a courtroom full of spectators? On the second day of testimony in the high-profile federal trial of Shawn Diddy Combs, the spotlight shifted to the woman who knows him best, Cassie Ventura. Cassie, his former partner of a decade, took the stand and delivered testimony that sent shockwaves through the industry. Her words were measured but unflinching. She detailed a pattern of control, violence, and abuse, describing events that stunned even the most seasoned courtroom observers. From CCTV footage allegedly capturing physical violence to unsettling accounts of exclusive parties involving paid male escorts, Cassie's testimony painted a deeply disturbing picture of life behind the walls of Diddy's empire. The room fell into stunned silence when she recounted a chilling 2011 incident in which Diddy allegedly threatened to blow up rapper Kid Cudi's car, followed by a harrowing account of a violent assault in 2018, one that occurred after what she described as a supposed closure conversation. The jury was also shown incriminating text messages and private videos, footage Diddy is accused of using as blackmail, prompting audible gasps from those in attendance. As the evidence played on screen, Diddy's composure visibly cracked. His jaw tightened, fists clenched, his gaze locked on the monitors. For the first time, it appeared the man once seen as untouchable was beginning to lose control of the narrative. But the trial is far from over. Cassie is set to face cross-examination, and Diddy's defense team is preparing to strike back hard. The world is watching. Will Cassie remain composed under pressure, or will the defense find a way to shake her credibility? Is she ready? Someone asked quietly before court resumed. Very ready, came the response, confident. Cassie is one of several accusers expected to take the stand, but her role in this case is pivotal. As the courtroom packed in for day 2, with reporters filing in and cameras snapping at every angle, all attention was on her. Among other revelations, she is expected to address the infamous 2016 hotel video that allegedly shows Diddy assaulting her during their relationship. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications for full coverage of every major development in this explosive trial. The courtroom was filled to capacity. The tension was palpable, and at the center of it all stood Cassie Ventura, no longer just a pop star or Diddy's former girlfriend, but a central witness in a case that's shaking the entertainment world to its core. As she stepped into the witness box, cameras flashed, catching a face marked by both strength and vulnerability. The world waited. The music industry held its breath. And the truth, long whispered behind closed doors, was finally being spoken aloud. For Shawn Diddy Combs, the second day of the trial marked a critical turning point. His once impenetrable image had already begun to fracture after the opening testimonies, but this day felt heavier, more consequential. As Cassie made her way to the witness stand, she didn't look in his direction. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead, unwavering. Diddy, however, watched her closely. For the first time, the confidence he typically exuded seemed to falter. The courtroom was wrapped in silence, tense and suffocating. The only sounds were the quiet rustling of papers and whispered exchanges between reporters in the gallery. Then the prosecutor rose, steady and composed, and asked Cassie to describe a night in 2016, a night already seared into the public's memory thanks to leaked CCTV footage that had gone viral the year before. This footage, grainy and difficult to watch, had sparked outrage when it first surfaced, and now it was about to be shown again, this time in a court of law. Diddy shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. the calm exterior he maintained beginning to fracture. As the footage appeared on screen, the jurors leaned in, tense and expectant. The video was chilling. Though it lacked sound, the images spoke volumes. Cassie could be seen shielding her face, visibly distressed as Diddy hurled a vase in her direction. It smashed violently against a wall. Moments later, she stumbled backward, clutching her face, her body language unmistakably fearful. No one in the room spoke. They didn't have to. The images told a story of rage, control, and terror, one that even Diddy could no longer deflect with charm or silence. His empire, so carefully constructed over decades, now stood on crumbling ground. The prosecutor paused the video, letting the silence settle as the weight of what had just been seen hung in the air. Turning back to Cassie, his voice softened, gentler now, recognizing the trauma she had just relived. "Can you tell us what happened next?" he asked. Cassie took a deep breath, clearly bracing herself. Though her voice remained steady, there was a noticeable tremor beneath the surface, one that spoke to the pain of revisiting a moment long buried. "He was yelling," she began, her gaze fixed on a distant point in the room, as if replaying it in her mind. "I couldn't make out everything he said. He was just so angry. I remember feeling cornered, like there was no way out." She paused. The prosecutor gave her space. The courtroom held its breath. Cassie then described how she'd managed to slip past Diddy and escape the room, despite his attempts to block her. She recounted the overwhelming fear that took hold as she made her way outside, bruised, shaken, and alone. The prosecutor showed the jury photographs taken in the aftermath. Cassie wearing oversized sunglasses to hide a black eye and a visibly swollen lip. The images starkly contrasted with the flawless image the world had seen of her in magazines and on red carpets. It was a jarring reminder of what had remained hidden behind closed doors. The prosecutor then brought up a series of text messages Diddy had sent her that night. Cassie confirmed the disturbing pattern they reflected. A confusing mix of false concern, emotional manipulation, and outright deceit. "He told me the police were at the door, that he was being arrested," she said, her voice tightening. "But it wasn't true. He just wanted me to come back. He was trying to scare me into returning." At the defense table, Diddy sat motionless, his jaw tense, his stare unbroken. His attorneys leaned in close, whispering, likely rethinking their approach. Until now, the defense had argued that their relationship was complicated, yes, but consensual, suggesting that Cassie's memories were distorted by time, emotion, or resentment. But in the courtroom, as the jury watched the footage and heard her testimony, there was no denying the sincerity in Cassie's words or the visible fear that still echoed in her eyes. The evidence, paired with her calm yet deeply emotional account, left a mark that would be hard to dismiss. The morning session pressed on, growing heavier with each passing minute, as the prosecutor turned to one of the most disturbing elements of the case, the so-called Freakoffs, a term now infamous and deeply associated with Diddy's controversial private life. These events had already dominated headlines, but Cassie's firsthand account added a level of clarity and horror that media speculation had only hinted at. Cassie described how these gatherings were not spontaneous parties, but meticulously planned encounters. Men were hired to perform sex acts while Diddy watched, and sometimes filmed. The courtroom was silent as she recounted the shame and violation of being recorded without her consent. Her voice didn't waver, but the emotional weight was unmistakable. "He blackmailed me," she said plainly. "Once on a private flight, he played one of the videos in front of people I didn't even know. I was humiliated." For many in the courtroom, it was the first time they'd heard such details from Cassie herself. The headlines had been relentless, the rumors swirling for years, but her testimony made it real, tangible, and heartbreaking. The prosecution introduced still images pulled from the recordings. Though anonymized and blurred for privacy, they were enough to drive the point home. Diddy leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen, his expression unreadable. As the judge called for the lunch recess, the courtroom let out a collective exhale. Reporters rushed to the exits, eager to break the latest wave of developments. Inside, Diddy's legal team gathered closely, their tone urgent, clearly scrambling to adjust course. Cassie remained on the stand, upright and composed, but her face reflected the emotional toll. She had spent the morning revisiting some of the darkest chapters of her life in front of a packed courtroom and the world watching beyond it. Before dismissing for lunch, the judge reminded the court of the seriousness of the proceedings and the importance of maintaining order. Cassie was scheduled to return to the stand after the break, where even more troubling allegations were expected to be revealed. As the room emptied, Diddy stayed seated, visibly shaken, no longer the confident figure who had once been seen as untouchable in the music world. The narrative was unraveling, the spotlight shifting from celebrity glamour to long-suppressed truths. And for Diddy, the fight for his image, his legacy, and possibly his freedom was only just beginning. The sun had barely crept above the skyline, yet the courthouse steps were already flooded with people. Reporters pressed against barricades, microphones extended, vying for the best angle. Cameras flashed with relentless urgency, capturing every twitch, every glance, every moment that might mark a shift in the story dominating headlines. News vans lined the sidewalks like sentinels, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, cables coiled across the pavement in tangled webs. The air was charged with anticipation. Everyone knew something significant was about to unfold. It was day 2 of testimony in the federal trial of Shawn Diddy Combs, and all eyes were on Cassie. When a sleek black SUV pulled to the curb, a hush fell over the crowd. Only the rhythmic snapping of camera shutters dared to break the silence. Then the door opened. Cassie stepped out. She wore a sharply tailored black suit, elegant, minimalist, powerful. It was a statement. She moved with poise, chin high, her expression unreadable behind large, dark sunglasses. Her hair was slicked back with precision, and her body language was controlled, but her clenched fists spoke volumes. She wasn't just arriving for testimony. She was walking into battle. Flanked by her attorneys, Cassie ignored the rapid-fire questions hurled her way. "Cassie, any reaction to Diddy's expression yesterday? Do you feel vindicated? Are you confident justice will be served?" She didn't pause. Her focus was fixed on the steps ahead, toward the courthouse, toward accountability, toward the end of a silence that had lasted far too long. Inside, the atmosphere was just as electric. Every seat was filled. Reporters, activists, spectators, each person craning to get a glimpse of the woman whose testimony had rocked one of the music industry's most iconic figures. The room itself seemed to lean in, wood-paneled walls lined with portraits of justices past, bathed in the low hum of anticipation. Murmurs passed quietly from row to row as Cassie entered. Her heels echoed through the chamber, each step purposeful and steady. The sound was both rhythmic and symbolic, a slow, deliberate march toward truth. At the defense table, Diddy sat still. His arms were folded, posture loose, face a mask of practiced calm. But his eyes tracked her every move. His fingers tapped against his forearm, a small betraying sign of the pressure simmering beneath the surface. His attorneys whispered quietly, scrolling through files, flipping through documents, preparing for another day of damage control. Then the judge entered, and the room stood as one. The scrape of chairs and rustling of jackets broke the tension momentarily. Then silence reclaimed the chamber. Cassie approached the stand. With a composed movement, she removed her sunglasses and placed them gently on the wooden surface before her. It was time. The second act of her testimony was about to begin, and the world once again was watching. For the first time that morning, Cassie looked up from the witness stand. Her eyes moved slowly across the courtroom, scanning faces, reporters, legal teams, jurors. Then for the briefest moment, her gaze locked with Puff Diddy's. It wasn't a stare, it was a flicker, a shared silence heavy with history. She looked away just as quickly, her jaw setting as she turned back to face the judge. Whatever emotion had surfaced, it was gone. What remained was determination. The prosecutor rose, smoothing the front of his jacket as he approached the stand. His pace was slow, purposeful. Though his voice was calm, there was a sharpness behind it, a quiet intensity. He gave her a nod, a gesture of mutual understanding. "Good morning, Miss Ventura," he said evenly. Cassie nodded in return. "Good morning." Her voice was steady, no shake, no pause. She was ready. The prosecutor didn't waste time. "Yesterday, you referenced an incident from 2016 at a hotel in Los Angeles. For the jury's clarity, can you walk us through what led up to that night?" Cassie inhaled deeply, her shoulders rising ever so slightly. Her hands remained tightly clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on a neutral spot just beyond the prosecutor. "We had attended an event earlier that evening," she began. "It was high profile. Industry people everywhere. At first, everything felt normal. He was in good spirits, outgoing, engaging. Everyone around us was laughing, drinking. He was the center of it all, like he always was." She paused, her tone neutral, but her fingers subtly tensed. "But I could sense it. There's always a shift with him, a moment where things turn. He started drinking more." His smile changed. It was forced, like he was trying to maintain something that was slipping. The prosecutor gave her a moment before asking, "Was there a particular event that caused this change?" Cassie nodded once, her lips tightening. "I was talking to someone, a producer, I think, just small talk, nothing unusual. But then I felt a hand on my arm. He was there, pulling me away. At first I thought he was just trying to get my attention, but then he started whispering in my ear, accusations. 'What are you saying to him? Are you trying to embarrass me?' It escalated so quickly." She swallowed, eyes still focused ahead. He was angry, really angry, but he never made a scene in public. That wasn't his style. He saved that for later. The room was completely silent, save for the scratch of pens and the distant hum of the ceiling fan. The prosecutor took a step closer, lowering his voice. "And what happened after you left the event?" Cassie's face grew more serious. "We went back to the hotel. I didn't say anything in the car. I knew better. But when we got into the room, it was like a switch flipped. He started yelling. I don't even remember what he was saying exactly. It was just noise, rage. He accused me of disrespecting him, of undermining him in front of people." She paused again, this time to steady her breath. "He grabbed a vase off the table and threw it. It hit the wall near me and shattered. I remember ducking, my ears ringing. I was frozen. I didn't know what he was going to do next." The prosecutor glanced toward the jury, giving them time to absorb her words. "Was that the same incident captured on the CCTV footage shown earlier?" Cassie nodded. "Yes, that was it." He followed up gently. "After that, what did you do?" "I got out," she said plainly. "I left the room when I had the chance. I didn't even grab my things. I just needed to get away." The prosecutor paused, then asked, "And later that night, did Mr. Combs contact you?" Cassie's expression shifted, equal parts sadness and disbelief. "Yes, he sent messages, told me the police were at the door, that he was being arrested, that it was my fault." She shook her head slightly. "But none of it was true. He just wanted to scare me. He wanted control." She turned toward the jury then, her eyes meeting theirs. "That was his pattern. Hurt you, then manipulate you into coming back." Across the room, Diddy sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the table. His legal team leaned in, whispering furiously. And Cassie? She sat tall, steady in her chair. Her words had cracked open something deeper, not just in the courtroom, but in the very narrative Diddy had built around himself for decades. And there was more still to come. The courtroom was still as stone, every eye fixed on the witness stand. Not a sound, no coughs, no shifting feet, just the unbearable silence of anticipation. Diddy sat rigid at the defense table, jaw clenched so tightly his temples pulsed. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale. His attorney leaned in and whispered something, but Diddy didn't react. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just stared, locked onto Cassie, unblinking. The prosecutor's voice gently broke the silence. "Miss Ventura, please tell us what happened when you returned to the hotel that night." Cassie's hands, which had been folded tightly together, slowly released. Her fingers spread across her lap, clutching the fabric of her skirt, grounding herself. "He was already there," she said quietly, waiting in the room. "I could tell something was wrong the second I walked in. He didn't speak. He just stared at me." Her voice dropped, but in the silence, every word rang out. Then he exploded. He started yelling, screaming. I couldn't even understand what he was saying. It was just rage. She swallowed, then added, "He picked up a vase from the table and threw it at me. I barely moved in time. It shattered behind me." The prosecutor let the moment breathe. The room was locked in, hanging on her every syllable. "Do you remember what he was yelling?" he asked gently. Cassie shook her head. "Not really. It was a blur, just noise, furious noise, but I remember how it made me feel, terrified, completely frozen." She paused, her voice faltering for the first time. "I tried to leave. I just wanted to get out. But he stood in front of the door. He wouldn't let me go." A quiet gasp passed through the gallery. The tension snapped like a wire. The judge immediately struck his gavel. "Order in the court," he said firmly, eyes sweeping the room. The prosecutor turned back to Cassie, softening his tone. "What happened after that?" Cassie closed her eyes for a beat, then exhaled. "I waited. I didn't fight or scream. I just waited for him to stop, to calm down. And when he did, I left. But I knew it wasn't the end, not really. Because with him, it never ended." Her words hovered in the air, heavy and raw. The prosecutor nodded and stepped back. "Thank you, Miss Ventura," he said quietly. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit the CCTV footage from that evening into evidence." The judge gave a solemn nod. "Admitted." The room seemed to tighten. The lights dimmed slightly as a screen lit up. Tension blanketed the space. Diddy leaned back slowly in his chair, his face stiff, eyes narrowing as the footage began to play. Cassie didn't turn around. She kept her eyes forward, her back straight, shoulders squared. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. And for the first time, it was clear. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was telling the truth, and the world was listening. The screen flickered to life, casting a cold bluish glow over the courtroom. Jurors, spectators, even the judge, all sat motionless, their attention fixed on the screen. The silence was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the low hum of the air conditioning suddenly seemed intrusive, a background noise cutting through the weight of what was unfolding. Grainy black and white footage began to play. In the upper corner, a timestamp glowed faintly. October 15th, 2016, the night now central to the trial. The prosecutor stepped aside, making sure the jury had a clear view, his face grim with the gravity of what was about to be shown. The first frame showed a hallway in a high-end Los Angeles hotel. Its marble floor gleamed under recessed lighting, pristine and eerily quiet. Cassie appeared in the frame, walking quickly. Her shoulders were tense, her head slightly lowered, clutching her handbag tightly against her body. Her movements were purposeful, but there was fear in her eyes, just a flicker as she glanced over her shoulder. Then Diddy entered the frame. His presence was a stark contrast. His stride was aggressive, deliberate, shoulders hunched, fists clenched at his sides, his jaw visibly tight. He looked like a man on the verge of losing control. The jury leaned in instinctively, eyes narrowing to catch every detail. Cassie reached the hotel suite first. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the key card, swiping it twice before the lock clicked open. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her, the tension on her face captured in those final moments by the hallway camera. The video paused. The prosecutor turned to the jury, his voice low but firm. "I want you to pay close attention to what happens next. This footage is critical in understanding what Cassie experienced that night." He nodded toward the technician, who resumed the video. The view shifted to a new angle, this time inside the suite. The camera was mounted in the corner of the living room, capturing the entire space in a slightly distorted wide lens. Cassie stood near the window, facing away from the door, setting her purse down on the ledge. She took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling slowly, visibly bracing herself. Seconds later, the door slammed open behind her. Diddy entered, and the door slammed shut behind him with a force that made the entire frame shake. The sound wasn't captured, but the violence in the movement was unmistakable. Cassie flinched at the noise, her whole body jolted, but she didn't turn around. She stood still, shoulders tense, back straight, as if she knew exactly what was coming. The screen froze on the image of Cassie staggering back, hand raised to her face, glass shards glittering around her like frozen chaos. The prosecutor turned to the witness stand, breaking the silence with a voice that had softened but still carried weight. "Miss Ventura, could you describe what you were feeling at that moment?" Cassie remained still for a beat, her fingers pressed tightly together in her lap. Her shoulders were tense, but her voice, when it came, was calm, measured but fragile at the edges. "I was scared," she said, eyes trained on the screen, refusing to look away. "I knew what was going to happen. I could feel it in the way he looked at me. It was like I was already guilty of something." The footage resumed. In the next sequence, Diddy stormed across the room toward her in just a few strides. The aggression in his body language was unmistakable. He grabbed her arm hard enough that her upper body twisted sharply. She spun to face him, startled, her lips moving fast. But there was no sound in the video. Her reaction, her panic, needed no translation. Cassie's eyes didn't leave the screen. "He was yelling," she said, voice low but audible in the stillness. "I couldn't understand all of it. He was slurring some of the words. But the anger, it was there. It filled the room. He wasn't himself. He wasn't the man the public saw. He wasn't even the man I used to know." The prosecutor waited, letting her lead. "Did you respond?" Cassie inhaled sharply through her nose, as if reliving the breath she took that night. "I asked him to stop," she said. "I told him he was scaring me. I remember saying those words over and over. I don't even know if he heard them." In the footage, she appeared to try stepping back to create distance. Diddy's grip visibly tightened. His finger came up inches from her face, pointing, jabbing the air between them as his entire frame radiated hostility. "He always did that," Cassie added quietly, almost to herself. The finger, the pointing, it was like a warning, like I needed to brace for what was coming. The next moment on the video was devastating. Diddy lunged sideways, grabbed the vase off the table with one hand, and hurled it across the room. The camera caught everything: the violent swing of his arm, the vase sailing through the air, and the explosion of glass as it shattered against the far wall. Cassie in the footage flinched violently, then staggered back, covering her face with both hands. The prosecutor stopped the video there. The room was frozen, the silence taut. "Miss Ventura," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "What happened next?" Cassie's eyes lowered to her lap, her thumbs rubbing slowly together. Her voice, though hushed, was steady. "I tried to leave," she said. "I wanted to get out of the room. I turned toward the door, but he was already there, standing in front of it, just watching me. He didn't say anything." She paused, her voice catching for just a second. "I remember touching my face. I didn't even feel the pain right away, but when I looked down, my hand had blood on it. I looked back at him, and he didn't move. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't help. He just stood there looking at me like I'd done something wrong." A collective shiver rippled through the room. Jurors shifted in their seats, some clearly shaken. Reporters whispered furiously into their recorders. Even the judge appeared slightly unsettled. Cassie looked up again, her voice stronger now, the emotion behind it rising. "He didn't care that I was hurt. He didn't care that I was scared. All he cared about was keeping control. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't a person to him. I was property." The prosecutor didn't press further. He didn't need to. He gave a small nod and stepped back. The image on the screen remained frozen. Cassie mid-stumble, glass glinting around her feet, one hand over her face, the other bracing herself against the wall. Diddy remained at the defense table, unmoving, though a vein in his neck throbbed visibly. His attorneys huddled around him, whispering urgently. But he didn't respond. He just stared ahead, jaw locked, the faintest flicker of emotion in his eyes. It was only the second day of testimony. But in that moment, the weight of the truth Cassie carried, truth that had been hidden for so long, felt undeniable. And the court, once filled with silence and doubt, now sat in the shadow of something it could no longer ignore. The prosecutor took a measured step forward, his voice gentler now. "Did he say anything to you before he left?" Cassie nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "He said, 'You did this. Look what you made me do.'" Her voice didn't waver, but the weight of the words fell heavy in the room. "And then he walked out. Just left me there." A silence followed, thick, suffocating. It stretched across the courtroom like a taut wire, ready to snap. Some jurors glanced at one another, visibly disturbed. A few stared down at their hands, others clenched their jaws or furrowed their brows, trying to mask their discomfort. The atmosphere had shifted once again, darker, heavier. At the defense table, Diddy remained stone-faced. His jaw was clenched tight, his gaze locked on the screen as if willing it to stop. His attorney leaned over, whispered something into his ear, but Diddy didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on Cassie, unblinking. The prosecutor, sensing the moment, adjusted his tone. "And what did you do after he left the room?" Cassie's voice was quiet but resolute. "I called a friend. She came to the hotel and helped me clean up." Her hands tightened around each other. "I didn't go to the hospital. I was too scared." "And the following day?" the prosecutor asked, pressing gently. Cassie looked down. "I wore sunglasses," she said simply. "I couldn't cover all the bruises, but I tried to hide them." She paused, then added, "He started sending messages, a lot of them. Some were apologies. Some were promises. But some were threats." The prosecutor walked calmly to the evidence table and picked up a folder. He held it up as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit 14 into evidence. These are text messages exchanged between Miss Ventura and Mr. Combs the morning after the incident." The judge called for order, nodded his approval, and instructed the technician to display the texts. One by one, the courtroom's monitors lit up, revealing a chilling sequence of messages. "Diddy, call me now. We need to talk. Fix this. Diddy, the cops are here. I'm getting arrested because of you. Cassie, Diddy." The courtroom remained utterly still. The jurors leaned forward, squinting slightly to read the stark white text against black screens. The words were simple, but their intent, the manipulation, the pressure, was unmistakable. Cassie didn't lift her head. Her hands remained clasped tightly together, her eyes fixed on the polished wood of the witness stand, almost as if she were trying to disappear into it. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but carried through the room. "He wanted me to come back," she said. "He always did that. He'd scare me, hurt me, then say something to pull me back in. And it worked. For a long time, it worked." The prosecutor stood still for a moment, letting her words settle in the room. Then, with a noticeable edge creeping into his voice, he asked, "Miss Ventura, this wasn't an isolated incident, was it?" Cassie lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. "No," she said firmly, "it wasn't." The prosecutor cleared his throat, breaking the thick silence that had settled over the room. "Miss Ventura," he said gently, his voice taking on a softer edge, "can you help us understand the context of those messages?" Cassie took a slow, steady breath. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. "I tried to leave," she said, "more than once, but every time he found a way to pull me back. There was always something he used to remind me who was in control. He made it clear that if I ever spoke out, if I ever truly tried to get away, he would destroy me. He promised me that, and I believed him." Her words, though calmly delivered, hung in the courtroom like smoke, heavy, inescapable, impossible to ignore. The prosecutor didn't speak right away. He gave her a moment, letting the weight of her statement sink in with the jury. Then, with quiet composure, he turned toward the judge and walked back to the evidence table. "Your Honor," he said, "at this time, the prosecution would like to call the next witness who can corroborate Miss Ventura's account of these events." The judge nodded solemnly, his expression unreadable but clearly affected by what had just unfolded. "Proceed," he said. Cassie rose from the stand. Her movements were controlled, her spine straight, her gaze forward. She didn't falter. As she stepped down, the courtroom remained silent. No shifting chairs, no murmurs. The gravity of her testimony still held everyone in place. The lights returned to their standard brightness. The screen that had just displayed some of the most painful moments of her life flickered once, then faded to black. But the impact of those images, her fear, his threats, the messages, remained etched in the minds of all who witnessed them. There was no forgetting now. The illusion of power had cracked, and the truth, at long last, had been spoken aloud. The bailiff opened the side door, and the next witness entered, eyes scanning the gallery with unease, shoulders tense, breath shallow. This person, too, carried a piece of the truth, and as they stepped forward toward the witness stand, the room braced for what would come next. The prosecutor, unwavering in his pursuit, approached the stand once more. His expression was grave, his eyes locked on Cassie with quiet intensity. The weight of what had just been revealed still lingered in the air, but he pressed forward. "Miss Ventura," he said, voice low and deliberate, "I want to bring your attention to an incident from 2011. During your earlier testimony, you briefly mentioned a connection with another artist, Scott Mescudi, professionally known as Kid Cudi. Is that correct?" Cassie nodded, the faintest shadow of emotion crossing her face. "Yes," she answered quietly. "We were friends. More than friends, actually. It was during a difficult time between Shawn and me." The prosecutor stepped closer, his shoes tapping softly against the marble floor. "Can you describe to the jury the nature of that relationship?" Cassie inhaled deeply, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were folded neatly in her lap. "It started as a friendship. He was kind. He listened," she said. "It wasn't something I planned. It just happened naturally. He was there when I felt alone. A ripple of whispers passed through the courtroom gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's sharp look. The tension was mounting. The prosecutor's tone softened, though his questions remained pointed. Did Mr. Combs become aware of your relationship with Mr. Cudi? Cassie's eyes flicked toward Diddy for just a moment, brief, but enough to register. Yes, she said quietly. He found out. How did he react? There was a long pause as Cassie seemed to weigh the cost of her next words. He was angry, she said finally, but not just angry. He said I betrayed him. He said I embarrassed him. He felt humiliated. The prosecutor stepped back slightly, letting her continue without pressure. What happened after that? Cassie exhaled slowly. He started making threats against Scott. At first I thought it was just him blowing off steam, saying things to scare me. But then it escalated. The prosecutor's brow furrowed. Escalated? How? Cassie's hands gripped each other tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. He said he'd blow up his car, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He told me it wouldn't be hard, that no one would know. I didn't believe him. I didn't want to believe he meant it. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a wave. The gallery erupted into stunned murmurs. The judge wasted no time slamming his gavel down hard. Order, he barked. If I hear another outburst, I will clear this room. That is your only warning. As the courtroom reluctantly settled back into uneasy silence, the prosecutor continued undeterred. Miss Ventura, just to be absolutely clear, after Mr. Combs made those threats, did Mr. Cudi's car in fact explode? Cassie nodded slowly, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was confirming. Yes, it happened months later. I remember seeing it on the news. He never brought it up to me, but I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew it was him. The room was breathless. The jury sat frozen, the gravity of her words sinking in, and for the first time in the trial, the implication was no longer just personal abuse. It was something darker, more dangerous. A threat that had crossed the line into something potentially criminal and deeply terrifying. The prosecutor turned to the evidence table and sifted through a stack of documents before selecting a manila folder. He held it up as he addressed the judge. Your Honor, he said clearly, the prosecution moves to enter Exhibit 33 into evidence. A 2011 police report detailing the explosion of a vehicle registered to Mr. Scott Cudi, known professionally as Kid Cudi. The investigation at the time found no mechanical failures or electrical faults. The cause of the explosion was deemed suspicious, though no suspect was officially named. The judge nodded, his expression grave. Exhibit 33 is admitted. Instantly, screens around the courtroom lit up, displaying the scanned pages of the police report. Grainy photographs, eyewitness statements, and technical findings filled the monitors. The images of the wreckage were disturbing. What remained of the car was a shell, blackened, twisted, barely recognizable. The heat had melted parts of the chassis, leaving behind only scorched metal and ash. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Reporters instinctively reached for their notepads. Jurors leaned forward, eyes wide. The visuals told a story louder than any words could. The prosecutor turned back to the jury, his tone calm but unflinching. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see here is not just a threat, it's follow-through. This wasn't speculation or emotional exaggeration. This was real. Miss Ventura lived with the knowledge of this for years, not just fearing for her own safety, but for those close to her. Cassie sat motionless, her eyes focused ahead. Her posture remained composed, her expression unreadable. Even with images of destruction flashing across the screen behind her, she didn't look away. At the defense table, Diddy's demeanor had darkened. His jaw flexed tightly, one hand spread flat against the table's edge as if grounding himself. His attorneys leaned in toward him, whispering quickly, their brows furrowed, their movements increasingly frantic. Papers slid back and forth, laptops flickered open. Damage control in real time. The prosecutor approached the witness stand once more. His voice was softer now, almost cautious. "Miss Ventura," he asked, "did you ever tell anyone about the threats Mr. Combs made against Mr. Muscudi?" Cassie shook her head. "No," she said, "I couldn't. He told me no one would believe me, and I believed him." Her voice trembled just slightly. It was the first visible crack in the composure she had worn like armor since entering the courtroom. But even in that moment, her strength was evident. The prosecutor nodded with quiet respect. "Thank you for your honesty," he said, "and your courage." He turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution is prepared to call our next witness, someone who can speak directly to the threats Miss Ventura just described." The judge nodded solemnly. "Proceed." The bailiff opened a side door. All eyes turned as a new figure stepped into the courtroom. Their posture was tense, eyes scanning the packed gallery before cautiously moving toward the witness stand. As the new witness approached, Cassie stepped down from the stand. Her steps were steady, her shoulders squared. The courtroom watched her cross the floor, every stride echoing softly, deliberately. She returned to her seat beside her legal team, her face composed but pale, her hands resting firmly in her lap. Diddy didn't raise his eyes as she passed. His gaze was fixed on the empty chair she had just vacated, his fists clenched tightly in his lap. But it was too late. The truth was no longer confined to whispers or memories. It had been spoken, clear, unflinching, and irrevocable. Whatever control Diddy once held over the narrative was gone, and the trial, now unmistakably transformed into a broader reckoning, pressed forward. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick, almost oppressive, as the afternoon session got underway. Reporters rushed back to their seats, the low hum of whispers rippling across the gallery just as the clock struck 1 p.m. Anticipation buzzed in the air. Everyone knew they were about to enter one of the most disturbing and sensitive parts of the case, the infamous Freakoff videos. These were the recordings Cassie had referenced earlier, footage she described as deeply humiliating, weaponized against her as tools of manipulation and blackmail. The courtroom was bracing for what came next. The prosecutor stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, his face composed but unreadable. His eyes swept across the jury, pausing briefly before shifting to Cassie, who had returned to the stand. She sat upright, her frame rigid but controlled, hands folded tightly in her lap. If she was afraid, she didn't show it. If there was doubt, it was buried beneath a layer of steely resolve. "Miss Ventura," the prosecutor began, his tone calm but firm, "earlier today, you testified that many of these so-called freak-off gatherings were recorded without your knowledge or consent. Is that accurate?" Cassie nodded, her gaze direct. "Yes," she said clearly, "almost all of them." A faint wave of murmurs moved through the room, silenced instantly by the judge's sharp glance over his glasses. The prosecutor continued, "Who did the filming?" Cassie swallowed, her focus fixed on a neutral point in the distance. "Shawn did," she answered quietly. "Sometimes it was members of his security team, but usually it was him. He liked to control everything, including the cameras." The prosecutor let the words hang for a moment, then turned and walked to the evidence table. He lifted a thick folder, worn at the edges, and carried it to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tightening slightly, "we move to submit Exhibit 42 into evidence. These are still images pulled directly from the recordings in question. All individuals' identities, aside from Miss Ventura's, have been redacted for privacy. However, we believe these images are essential to understanding the context and nature of these events. The judge looked up, his expression grave. He nodded. "Admitted," he said crisply. The lights in the courtroom dimmed, and the hum of the projector filled the room once more. The first image appeared on the screen, grainy but unmistakable. It was a lavish setting. Floor-length velvet curtains, high ceilings, gold-trimmed furniture. In the center of the frame sat Cassie, positioned on a plush sectional sofa. Her body was still, her shoulders taut, her hands folded precisely in her lap. Her face was turned slightly to the side, eyes locked on something beyond the edge of the lens, something unseen but clearly unsettling. The prosecutor stepped toward the screen. "Miss Ventura," he said gently, "can you describe what we're seeing in this image?" Cassie took a shallow breath, the memory clearly weighing on her. "That was one of the first ones," she said. "He called them freakoffs. He'd bring in people, strangers, people I didn't know. They were paid to participate." The prosecutor nodded, prompting her to continue. "And you?" he asked, his voice careful. "Were you paid to be there?" Cassie shook her head, firm and quick. "No," she said. "I wasn't there by choice. I didn't want to be there. I didn't agree to be filmed. I was there because I had to be." The room seemed to tighten around her words. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone quiet but pointed. "When you say you had to be there, can you explain that for the jury?" Cassie hesitated for a breath, then slowly turned her eyes toward Diddy. He sat rigid at the defense table, fingers interlocked, jaw visibly tensed. He didn't look at her. "He made me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "If I said no, there were consequences." The words settled into the room like a heavy fog. The truth in them was raw, unpolished, and undeniable. The images on the screen continued to flicker, but no one was looking at them anymore. Every eye was on Cassie, and every person in that room could feel it. This was not just testimony, it was a reckoning, and it wasn't over yet. The silence that followed Cassie's words was almost unbearable. The low hum of the projector, once barely noticeable, now buzzed loudly in the quiet room. No one moved, no one spoke. The prosecutor stepped back slightly, his eyes still fixed on Cassie. Consequences," he echoed, his voice low but deliberate. Cassie didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes he'd yell, sometimes it was worse, but mostly it was threats. He had videos, recordings from before. He said he'd release them, said he'd ruin me if I didn't do what he wanted." The prosecutor gave a slow nod, then turned back to the screen. The next image filled the monitors. It was darker this time, more intimate. The space was dimly lit by candlelight and the soft blue glow of several screens. Cassie appeared in the center of the frame again, her body tense, shoulders rigid, surrounded by shadowed, blurred figures. The setting looked more like a scene than a party. The prosecutor gestured to the image. "Can you tell us about this?" Cassie glanced up at the screen, her expression hardening with resolve. "That was another one," she said, her voice firmer now. "He called it a party, but it wasn't. It was for him. It was always for him, for his amusement." The prosecutor paused, letting the truth hang in the air. "Did he ever show these videos to others?" Cassie's lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes on flights, private jets, he'd just play them. Like it was normal. Like it was entertainment." A wave of discomfort rolled through the gallery. The jury shifted in their seats. Some exchanged looks, shock, disgust, disbelief etched across their faces. Others simply stared ahead, stone-faced. The judge quickly rapped his gavel once, restoring order, but the tone in the room had changed. The tension had thickened into something palpable. The prosecutor returned to the evidence table and opened another folder. His voice, when he spoke again, had hardened. "Your Honor," he said, "we now move to enter Exhibit 43 into evidence. These are a series of text messages exchanged between Miss Ventura and Mr. Combs during the period when these gatherings occurred. These messages directly reference both the events and the unauthorized recordings." The judge nodded solemnly. "Exhibit 43 is admitted." The screen shifted again, this time displaying a sequence of texts. The font was stark and clinical, but the words hit with force. "Diddy, I have everything. Don't forget that. Cassie, please don't show anyone. Diddy, you want to play games? I can play games too. Cassie, I just want this to stop. Diddy, it stops when I say it stops." The room froze. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the screen, reading, rereading. The silence was crushing. No one spoke. No one moved. Cassie remained still, her face unreadable, but her eyes, steady, unwavering, held the weight of years of fear, shame, and silence. Now, she was no longer hiding. She was showing the world exactly what she had endured. The prosecutor stepped forward again and cleared his throat softly, cutting through the silence. The truth had been spoken. The evidence laid bare, and there was no going back. "Miss Ventura," the prosecutor said gently, his tone shifting to something more intimate, more careful, "can you help us understand the meaning behind these messages?" Cassie drew in a breath, steadying herself. "I tried to leave," she said, her voice low but clear. "I tried more than once. But he always had something to hold over me. There was always a threat, always a consequence waiting." She paused, her eyes fixed ahead. "He told me that if I ever spoke out, if I ever walked away, my life would be over, and I believed him, because he made sure I did." The prosecutor didn't respond immediately. He gave the room time to absorb the weight of her words. Then he turned to the jury, his voice steady but charged with significance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what you've seen and heard here today isn't just about physical violence. It's about control, psychological warfare, a calculated system designed to isolate, to silence, to dominate, and to cover it all up." The room remained completely still, the silence not empty but dense, thick with emotion, with understanding, with a truth that could no longer be ignored. The walls of the courtroom seemed to hold their breath. Outside, the scene had grown chaotic. Reporters pushed forward, microphones in hand, cameras flashing with every movement at the courthouse doors. The world was watching, waiting for every update. But inside, the revelation had already landed like a seismic wave. Cassie remained seated in the witness box, her posture unshaken. Her gaze was forward, unfaltering. Her hands were still clasped tightly in her lap, the only sign of the pressure she continued to carry. She had endured years of silence, of fear, of being controlled. Now she was reclaiming her voice. The courtroom had become more than a chamber of law. It was a reckoning, and Cassie was no longer the one on trial. She was the one telling the truth, and the world was finally listening. The tension in the courtroom had been escalating steadily since the afternoon session resumed. What had once been a composed and procedural atmosphere had transformed into something sharp, charged, almost volatile. With every piece of testimony, every image, every word spoken by Cassie, the carefully curated myth of Shawn "Diddy" Combs was beginning to crack. The man known for decades as a music mogul and cultural icon was now sitting at the center of something far darker. His legal team, once composed and controlled, had grown visibly agitated. Files were shuffled, notes scribbled hastily, hushed exchanges passed urgently between attorneys. Diddy himself sat motionless, hunched forward, eyes glued to the polished surface of the table. His fingers tapped rhythmically, a quiet, relentless beat that spoke volumes. It wasn't nerves, it was control slipping through his hands. The prosecutor stepped back from the witness stand facing the judge. His voice cut clean through the silence. "Your Honor," he said, steady and composed, "the prosecution moves to enter Exhibit 49 into evidence. This is surveillance footage taken from Mr. Combs's residence, capturing multiple altercations involving Miss Ventura." The gallery stirred. Journalists leaned forward in their seats, fingers frozen above their keyboards. Anticipation thick in the air. The judge gave a single nod. "Exhibit 49 is admitted," he said, the words clipped and definitive. The lights dimmed, and once again the room fell into a tense silence as the screen lit up. The footage, surprisingly clear, was captured by hidden security cameras placed throughout a lavish home. The timestamp read May 12th, 2017. The room displayed on the screen looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. An opulent living room adorned with plush furnishings, gilded decor, and platinum plaques lining the walls. But the scene unfolding in its center was anything but glamorous. Cassie stood with her arms crossed, wearing a simple black dress. Her posture was guarded, her stance defensive. Across from her, Diddy paced like a storm brewing. His gestures were wild, erratic. Though the footage was silent, his fury needed no soundtrack. His expression, his body language, everything about him radiated anger. He pointed at her repeatedly, gesturing aggressively as he spoke. Cassie didn't move. She didn't yell back. She simply stood there, shoulders stiff, her eyes fixed on him with a quiet, exhausted resilience. The prosecutor paused the video and turned back to the witness stand. "Miss Ventura," he said gently, "can you tell us what's happening in this moment?" Cassie looked up at the screen, her expression tightening. Her voice, when it came, was firm. "That was the night I tried to leave," she said. "I told him I was done. I told him I couldn't do it anymore." The prosecutor gave a slow nod. "And how did he respond?" Cassie's gaze flickered, briefly haunted. "He told me I wasn't going anywhere, that I belonged to him, that I always would." A stunned murmur moved through the gallery. Even those who had heard the rumors, who had read the reports, seemed caught off guard by the cold finality of her words. The judge didn't hesitate. He brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. "Order," he commanded firmly. "This courtroom will maintain order." But the damage had already been done. The footage, the testimony, the atmosphere, it was all shifting. What had once been whispers was now fact. And for the first time, even the courtroom seemed to recognize that the empire Diddy had spent a lifetime building was beginning to collapse under the weight of truth. The prosecutor turned his attention back to the screen. "I'd like to resume the footage," he said, nodding to the technician. The video started again, and the tension in the room instantly returned. On screen, Diddy's pacing had grown more erratic. His movements were sharper, more aggressive. He stepped toward Cassie, his hands raised and gesturing dangerously close to her face. Cassie didn't flinch. Her arms remained crossed tightly over her chest, her posture unwavering. But then, suddenly, Diddy reached out and grabbed her by the arm. The jury collectively gasped, a sharp intake of breath cutting through the room like wind rushing through a crack in a closed window. Cassie jerked backward in the video, struggling against his grip, trying to pull away. He pulled her closer, his hand clamped around her arm with visible force. The video paused. The prosecutor turned back to Cassie. His voice was softer now, but heavy with purpose. "Miss Ventura, can you describe for the jury what we just saw?" Cassie didn't look at the screen. Her eyes stayed fixed forward. "He wouldn't let me leave," she said simply. "He grabbed me and told me that if I walked out that door, I wouldn't make it very far." The prosecutor's face darkened. "And did you believe him?" Cassie nodded slowly, her voice steady. "Yes," she said. I believed him. The prosecutor stepped back, folding his hands. His tone turned formal again. Your Honor, he addressed the judge, at this time, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 50 into evidence. This is an audio recording of a separate incident in which Mr. Combs can be heard making explicit threats toward Miss Ventura. The judge raised an eyebrow. Audio recording? He asked. The prosecutor nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The recording was made by Miss Ventura during a separate altercation. We believe it supports her testimony regarding the threats and the coercive nature of their relationship. The judge considered for a brief moment before giving a firm nod. Motion granted. The courtroom speakers hissed to life with a burst of static before the audio began to play. The silence that preceded it was suffocating. Every person in the room was holding still, bracing. The recording was grainy but unmistakable. Diddy's voice rang out, sharp, forceful, filled with rage. You think you can just walk away from me? He barked. You think this is over? I own you. I made you. You leave and I'll make sure you disappear. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Some spectators covered their mouths. Others sat frozen in disbelief. The judge struck his gavel, once, then again. Order, he demanded, his voice stern and commanding. Order in this courtroom. But the recording wasn't finished. I'll burn it all down before I let you walk away. Diddy's voice continued, rising in fury. You think anyone's going to believe you? They all know you're crazy. You're nothing without me. Then silence. The audio clicked off. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, thicker than before, like the very air had been sucked out. Cassie remained still on the stand, her eyes focused straight ahead, unblinking. Her expression was steady, no breakdown, no reaction, just a quiet, unshakable resolve, the kind that came from years of surviving. Across the room, Diddy sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his face unreadable but flushed with a quiet fury. His lawyers leaned in again, whispering urgently, flipping through notes and files. But Diddy didn't move. His eyes were locked forward, unmoving, a mask of iron and defiance. The prosecutor stepped forward once more. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. Miss Ventura, was that Mr. Combs's voice in the recording? Cassie didn't hesitate. Yes, she said clearly, that was him. And can you recall the date this recording was made? Cassie gave a single nod. April 14th, 2018. The prosecutor nodded slowly. And was that the first time he threatened you like that? Cassie's eyes dimmed just slightly, a flicker of something old and heavy passing across her face. No, she said, it wasn't the first, and it wasn't the last. The room fell silent again. The weight of her truth pressed down on everyone, and this time no one dared to look away. Outside, a chaotic sea of media had overtaken the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed relentlessly, microphones thrust toward anyone wearing a badge, a lanyard, or holding a stack of legal files. Reporters delivered breathless live updates to audiences around the world who were hanging on every twist in a trial that had not only rocked the music industry, but ignited a larger cultural reckoning. Inside, the tension was even more palpable. The walls seemed to close in with each new revelation, as if the building itself were absorbing the truth, an echo that refused to fade. At the defense table, Diddy remained eerily still, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight, and his eyes fixed forward, unflinching. The whispers among his attorneys grew more frequent, more urgent, but he didn't respond. The evidence had been heard. The threats were now public record, and the empire he'd spent decades building was under siege. The prosecutor took a final step back from the witness stand and turned toward the judge. Your Honor, he said, voice steady and composed, the prosecution calls its next witness, someone who can corroborate Miss Ventura's testimony and speak directly to the threats and behavior she has described. The judge gave a solemn nod. Proceed. The bailiff opened the door leading to the witness area. The audience shifted, leaning forward slightly. Even the murmuring gallery fell quiet as anticipation rose again, thick and unshakable. The air was heavy, the kind of heavy that comes not from heat or humidity, but from truth, from the weight of what had been revealed. And what had been revealed was seismic. In just 2 days of testimony, Cassie Ventura, once a fixture of red carpets and glossy magazine covers, had dismantled the public image of Shawn Diddy Combs. Her voice had cut through years of silence and fear, revealing a deeply disturbing pattern of abuse, coercion, and control. From the violent outbursts caught on hotel CCTV to disturbing accounts of so-called Freakoff parties, her testimony didn't just challenge Diddy's reputation, it unraveled it. The courtroom had gone silent when she spoke of him threatening to blow up Kid Cudi's car. The footage of the shattered vase, the damning text messages, the private videos allegedly used as blackmail. Each one had stripped away the polished exterior of a man once viewed as untouchable. As Cassie spoke, Diddy's mask began to slip. His fists clenched, his eyes narrowed, and for the first time, the man known for his power and presence looked small, cornered. And yet this was only the beginning. Tomorrow Cassie would return to the stand for cross-examination. Diddy's defense team, emboldened if not desperate, was ready to fight back. Their strategy was unknown, but their intent was clear: discredit, dismantle, and regain control of the narrative. Would Cassie hold under pressure? Or would the defense find a crack in her composure? Whatever happens next, the world is watching. Cassie Ventura is no longer just a pop star, no longer just a former girlfriend. She is now a central figure in a trial that is exposing not only a powerful man, but an entire system that enabled him. Among the many witnesses expected to testify, she is the first to speak with such unrelenting clarity. She's expected to address everything, from the leaked 2016 hotel video to the years of private abuse hidden behind glamour and fame. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single development from what may become one of the most significant celebrity trials of the decade. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. Every eye was on Cassie. She had stepped into the spotlight not to perform, but to speak the truth. And as she took the stand, cameras flashed, capturing her stoic expression, a mix of quiet strength and the scars of survival. The night before, speculation ran rampant. Social media burned with theories and predictions. Would she falter? Would she stay silent? Or would she finally break the silence that had haunted her for over a decade? She answered that question the moment she walked into court, without looking at Diddy, without hesitation. And as she began to recount the night of October 15th, 2016, with that haunting footage playing behind her, Diddy hurling a vase, Cassie shielding her face, the courtroom held its breath. Her voice may have been quiet, but the impact was deafening, and it's still reverberating. Her voice remained steady, but beneath the surface, there was a tremor, an unmistakable sign that she was reliving something deeply painful. "He was yelling," Cassie said, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the courtroom, as if the scene were replaying in real time. "I couldn't understand everything he was saying. He was just furious. I remember feeling completely trapped." She paused, and the prosecutor didn't push. He gave her space, knowing that the silence spoke volumes. The courtroom sat in a collective stillness, breath held, waiting. Cassie went on, describing how she managed to escape the room despite Diddy's attempts to block the door. She spoke of the terror that overcame her when she finally found herself outside, alone, bruised, and shaken. Photographs were then shown to the jury. Cassie appeared in the images wearing oversized sunglasses, trying to mask a swollen lip and a black eye. The contrast was jarring between the polished public image the world knew and the private pain now laid bare. The prosecutor then shifted to the messages Diddy sent her that night. Cassie confirmed what they revealed, a calculated pattern of manipulation wrapped in false concern. He said the police were at the door, that he was getting arrested, she recounted, her voice tightening slightly. But it wasn't true. It was just a lie to make me come back. At the defense table, Diddy sat frozen. He didn't look at the screen, nor at Cassie. His expression remained fixed. But there was a subtle shift, a stiffness in his shoulders, a flicker of tension in his jaw. His attorneys leaned in, whispering urgently, flipping through notes and adjusting documents. The impact of the testimony had landed hard. The defense's argument that the relationship was complicated but consensual was growing increasingly difficult to reconcile with the video evidence and Cassie's calm but piercing testimony. The morning continued. The prosecutor moved into more disturbing territory, the so-called freakoffs that had dominated headlines but remained cloaked in rumor. Now those rumors had a voice. Cassie described the events in chilling detail. These weren't parties, she said. They were orchestrated performances. Men were hired to engage in sex acts while Diddy watched, sometimes filmed, without her consent. The courtroom was silent, save for Cassie's voice. He blackmailed me, she said plainly. One time, on a flight, he played one of the recordings in front of strangers. He called it entertainment. I was mortified. It was the first time many had heard such detail from Cassie directly. While the media had speculated for years, hearing it from her, raw and unfiltered, was something else entirely. To support her testimony, the prosecution presented a series of still images extracted from the videos. The visuals were blurred, identities masked, but the scenes were unmistakable. The intention behind them was clear. Diddy leaned forward slightly as the images appeared, eyes narrowing. His face remained unreadable. As the court prepared for recess, the room collectively exhaled. Reporters rushed toward the exits to deliver updates to a world now glued to every word. Inside, Diddy's defense team huddled tightly, reviewing notes and whispering behind folders, visibly recalibrating their strategy. Cassie, still seated on the stand, remained composed, but the toll was beginning to show. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion, yet her posture didn't waver. Before dismissing for lunch, the judge addressed the room, his voice firm. He reminded everyone of the seriousness of the proceedings and the decorum expected in a courtroom of this magnitude. Cassie would return in the afternoon to continue her testimony. More revelations were expected, possibly even more damning than what had already been revealed. As the gallery emptied, the weight of the morning hung thick in the air. Diddy stayed in his seat, staring blankly ahead. The confidence he once exuded, the aura of invincibility, had vanished. He looked smaller now, shaken. The truth, long buried under celebrity status, money, and myth, was being unearthed piece by piece. And for Diddy, the unraveling had only just begun.